Thanks for checking out this horror debate series video. So let's go ahead and tackle the best horror subgenre. And I will say there's so many great subgenres within horror. I think it's one of the richest genres of film that has the most subgenres to it and the most interesting subgenres at that. Again, real quick, for people who don't know how this goes, watch my video, get my pick for the best horror subgenre, then go to Your Friendly Neighborhood Uncle Pete's channel, which is linked in my description. Watch his video of the same name. Then, if you want, you can come back here, go to my community tab, and vote for who you think did the best or had the best pick, or however you want to put it. There's also a tie option. But let's go ahead and move forward with my pick for best horror subgenre. It's going to be art house horror. Now, here's the thing. For people who know me or watch my channel long enough, you'll understand that I love the deeper, more interesting films. And I think that art house horror really is kind of at the forefront of that. Some people may call it elevated horror. We don't like that term on my channel. We don't like that term for the most part within the horror community. That's kind of a term that's been placed on it from outside of the horror community for the most part, because it's a way for people to be like, oh, well, it's not like regular horror, it's better. So it's almost like it's not horror, it's something totally different. No, it's still horror. It's still very firmly placed in horror, but I'm going with calling it art house horror. I think that makes the most sense. And I guess I should just tell you off the bat some really good examples of art house horror. Let me say Let the Right One In is one of the films that comes to mind immediately. Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water, that's another great one. Tons of A24 films are considered art house horror. So let me go ahead. First, I want to give you a definition, the Wikipedia definition of art house horror. Art horror films tend to rely on atmosphere building, psychological character development, cinematic style, and philosophical themes for effect, rather than straightforward scares. So it's a much deeper type of film than something like a straight up slasher, which, I'm not trying to put down slashers. I love slashers. I'm a big fan. It's just a lot different, a lot deeper, and for that reason, I think it's a much better subgenre, or in this case, the best subgenre. Let me restart that one. This subgenre is well represented by the A24 horror output, which is highly regarded in general. Outside of the horror community, inside of the horror community, A24 output is considered to be wonderful. The overwhelming majority of what A24 puts out from its horror arm is considered art house horror. Like I said before, the definition: atmosphere building, psychological character development, cinematic style, philosophical themes. Their films typically have all of those things. So think about A24 films, think about how much you do or don't like A24 films, and that would tell you how much do you like art house horror. I think that that's probably the best example to give, so people can think of a whole body of films, because most people, when you say A24 horror, can kind of go through the Rolodex in their head of, Midsommar, Hereditary, Black Coat's Daughter, in Under the Skin, Killing of a Sacred Deer, stuff like that. Anyway, next point. These are the types of horror films that are most likely to garner critical acclaim, which helps bring in non-horror fans to watch. Now, not that we care that much about bringing more people into the horror fold. Whoever's here is here. That's totally fine. Anyone who finds their way in, that's also awesome. But it's a more accessible type of subgenre for a lot of people, because it can become that very easy gateway for people who are kind of like, well, I don't really like horror films because they're just about blood and guts, or they're just about, interesting ways that people get killed. These are the types of films that those people can have their minds opened up, and not only can be like, oh, I actually may like some horror films now, but can start to look at people within the horror community in a different way. I've experienced this in my personal life, where I'm into horror films and people immediately will assume, oh, you're a dark person. You have like emotional problems potentially. Like you like violence. You're a weird individual. It's not that, obviously. Anyone in the horror community knows it, but Then I've had some of those same people watch a what's considered art house horror film. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that horror could be like this. I didn't know that this was considered horror, really. Yes, it is horror. And then that's a way that it just kind of gets them to open their mind up a little bit more. And like I said, not just to watching more of those films, but also to being more accepting of people within the horror community, because they feel then some sort of connection in that way. They're like, oh, I like this thing that that all these people like, and now I kind of get it. Now I kind of see where they're coming from, because that's one of the biggest issues in general that we have with categorization of people, is not understanding where those people are coming from and not understanding their experiences and how they experience things. So it really helps with that. They typically have stunning cinematography and a lot of visual charm. Again, think about the films I've already mentioned. All those films from A24, The Shape of Water, Let the Right One In, films like that. Just think like beautiful cinematics, wonderful shot framing, very interesting camera movements. Also think something like even though this isn't, the exact thing, think about, some of the style that's been stolen from Dario Argento. That typically ends up being incorporated into a lot of art house horror films. And I can actually see some people actually saying that even though it is an Italian kind of witch film, Suspiria is kind of an early art house horror film. These are the horror films with typically the most to say from a societal standpoint. Horror films historically have had something to say at the core of them. There's always these themes. There's always this underlying message of something that the writer and filmmaker are trying to get to say this is good, this is bad. And sometimes not even that. Actually, most of the times not even that. Just kind of posing a question, putting a mirror up to society and saying, what do you see? Because the representation on the screen that we're showing you right now is making you look at how they view society and the ills and the problems with society at that point. So just think about all those films that kind of do that. Just to pull out an idea, the film Dream Scenario recently kind of played a little bit at, or actually a lot at, cancel culture and how that has, become overkill, problematic online and in real life. And, depending on what you feel about it, that is a film that obviously holds that up to your face and says, this is something that's going on right now. Here's an interesting artistic representation of this. What do you think? What do you feel? And these are the types of films that then prompt you to kind of think deeper about those things. It's putting it right in your face because it's something that you deal with on a daily basis, but it's not something that you think about deeply on a daily basis. And for people like us who are horror fans, well, I mean, anyone who's watching this who considers themselves a horror fan, for us individuals, when you're just watching horror films, you're not necessarily looking to look a little bit deeper at those types of things, but it can just end up happening if you happen to watch one of these art house horror films that then just makes you like, well, okay, kind of want to think about this now. The philosophical nature of the films can elicit deeper individual thinking, which can be beneficial. That's kind of what I was talking about. Those moments where sometimes it makes people think a little bit deeper, that can actually lead to something more. These are films that aren't just like slasher films where it's kind of like, yeah, that's entertainment. That's a lot of fun. And there's obviously a place for that because that's a good time. Relax, have a good time, get some good laughs, see some good kills, some cool gore. You're feeling good. These are films typically don't have you feeling as good because of, having deeper messages to them, but they can potentially make you think about things that can change viewpoints societally, can have you think about yourself, look internally. Trying to think if there are any films like right off the bat that I can think of art house horror wise that make you think, like kind of look inward. I think Midsommar kind of was one for me personally, because it's about, at its core, and Ari Aster has said this, it's about going through a terrible relationship and coming out on the other side. And everything that happens within that film are the stages of the terrible relationship, even getting to the breakup and how the person is left feeling after that breakup. That's really interesting because it made me kind of look inward and think back to when I've had that happen in my life and thinking, wow, this is actually a very interesting representation of that. And yeah, I feel all those things. So it made me kind of get a little bit more in touch with those feelings that I hadn't necessarily dealt with so much when they were occurring. Because you go through these things, but unless you kind of stop and really take note of them and try to work through what this is that you're feeling and why, you can just end up blowing past it and not actually dealing with it. And then the last thing I just want to say, kind of tied into the last thing I said, is these are the types of films that tend to stick with you longer, potentially leaving a lasting impact. Not just being beneficial from a change standpoint, but these become more memorable films in a lot of ways because there's so much more to them. You end up a lot of the times taking a lot more time after the film is done to really deeply think about it, which ingrains it in your actual memory a lot easier. As opposed to a movie where you're just like, oh yeah, you know, cool kills, cool practical effects, whatever, and then you just move on to the next film a lot of the time. These kind of beg you for more attention. They make you pay more attention for whatever reason, whether it's the thematic stuff, the visuals, the character development, whatever. So anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it. That's why I think, for all those reasons, that art house horror is the best horror subgenre. But this is where I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Actually, Uncle Pete and I both would like to hear that. Go ahead and put it in the comments. And again, I've said this before, you can copy and paste the same comment between both our videos. We will read those and respond to them appropriately. Do us both a favor. Hit subscribe to our channels if you haven't already. That is the best way to support us, to repay us for all this free content we're putting out. You can also put a thumbs up on this video and any video that either of us put up, because that helps us with the YouTube algorithm. And finally, you can hit the notification bell button, because then you'll know when we're putting up new videos. So thank you everyone so much for participating in these videos. We do have a good time with them. Very interested to see what other people's picks are in the comments. And yeah, thank you for your time. Until next time, keep it brutal.